My name is Emma Richardson, and for most of my life, I knew exactly what my role was in my family, the supporting actor in my sister's starring role, not because anyone explicitly stated it at first, but because of countless moments where priorities were silently assigned. Who got career advice at the dinner table? Who got introductions to important connections? Who got the "we believe in your dreams" speeches? And who got the "you're practical, you'll understand" dismissals? It all crystallized into actual words one evening when I mentioned applying to graduate school, and my dad looked up from his phone and said, "Your sister's future comes first. Your plans don't really count right now." My mom nodded like he had just stated a scientific fact. My sister Madison smiled, not smugly, but with the comfortable confidence of someone who had never questioned their place at the center. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just said softly, "Okay." And from that moment forward, I stopped waiting for permission to prioritize my own future. Separate goals, separate networks, separate vision. I had no idea that years later, when my family's world started crumbling, they would suddenly decide that my future counted after all, specifically, that it should count towards saving theirs. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever had your dreams dismissed because someone else's were deemed more important? And where are you right now? What part of the world are you listening from? Because I know I'm not alone in carrying this kind of story. The Richardson household in Portland didn't need mission statements or family meetings to establish the hierarchy. It existed in the way conversations flowed, the way attention pooled, the way resources moved like water naturally finding its path downhill toward Madison. Our parents weren't cruel people. They were just absolutely convinced, with the certainty of religious devotion, that Madison's path was the one that mattered most, the one worth every sacrifice, every investment, every ounce of family energy. Madison was the charismatic one, the daughter who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they were part of something special. She was the one with big dreams, the kind you could photograph and frame, dreams about fashion design, about launching her own brand, about seeing her name on boutique storefronts from Portland to New York. She had vision boards covering her bedroom walls, mood boards with fabric swatches and sketches, business plans written in colorful gel pens with margins full of hearts and stars. I was the organized one, the daughter who kept detailed calendars, who finished assignments 3 days early, who color-coded her notes and never needed to be reminded about deadlines, which sounded like praise but translated to, "Emma doesn't need our attention. She'll figure it out herself." The favoritism started early, embedded so deeply into our family structure that it became invisible, like the foundation of a house. When Madison was 13 and I was 10, our parents enrolled her in a prestigious summer program at a design school in San Francisco. 3 weeks of intensive workshops, portfolio development, mentorship from working designers, the kind of opportunity that required an application essay, references, and a program fee that made my dad wince when he wrote the check. I remember standing in her doorway watching her pack, folding expensive art supplies into a new suitcase my parents bought specifically for the trip. She was practically vibrating with excitement, talking about techniques she would learn, connections she would make, the future she was stepping into. That same summer, I went to the local community center's free programs, learning basic coding in a cramped room with outdated computers and an instructor who seemed perpetually exhausted. When I asked why Madison got the special program and I didn't, my mom knelt down, brushed my hair behind my ear, and said gently, "Sweetheart, Madison needs these opportunities to develop her talent. You're already so capable. You don't need expensive programs to succeed. And honestly, it helps the family to be practical with at least one child." Even at 10, I understood the economics of favoritism. One daughter was an investment portfolio. The other was a savings account. The pattern sharpened as we moved through adolescence. When Madison turned 17, my parents spent months helping her build a professional portfolio, hiring a photographer for a full-day shoot, paying for professional printing and binding, connecting her with alumni from their college who worked in fashion and retail. They drove her to portfolio reviews in Seattle, took vacation days to support her applications to design schools, framed her early sketches like museum pieces in our living room. I turned 17 2 years later during finals week, Came home after a student government meeting where I had been elected treasurer, and found a grocery store cake with candles stuck haphazardly into the frosting. My parents were at the kitchen table, tired from work, scrolling through their phones. My dad looked up briefly and said, "Sorry we couldn't do more this year, honey. Madison's applications are expensive, and we're stretched thin. But you're doing great in school anyway. That's the best gift, right?" I cut the cake myself, served slices to everyone, and cleaned up afterward because by then I already knew how the script worked. Madison received experiences. I received expectations. Vacations illustrated the dynamic perfectly. Our family photo albums could be divided into two distinct categories: albums celebrating Madison's adventures, trips timed around fashion exhibitions, design conferences, visits to textile museums, entire weekends built around expanding her creative vision, and then the albums from the years I stayed home because someone needs to watch the house, or the timing doesn't work with your schedule. The one family trip I actually attended, a long weekend in San Francisco when I was 14. I spent most of the time carrying everyone's bags through crowded streets while Madison visited design studios and boutiques. In the 300 photos from that trip, I appeared in maybe 12, always partially cropped, always in the background, always holding something for someone else. By the time I was 13, I had internalized a truth that nobody needed to announce at a family meeting. Our family operated with two categories of children. One whose future was a shared family project, discussed at length, supported with enthusiasm, protected and nurtured with every available resource. And one whose future was assumed to be self-generating, requiring no fertilizer, no cultivation, no particular attention, like a cactus that would survive in any conditions because survival was simply its nature. One child whose dreams were treated as fragile and precious. One child whose dreams were treated as hobbies that would sort themselves out eventually. No one ever gathered us together to say, Madison's future matters more than Emma's. They didn't need to. It was encoded in every conversation that got interrupted when Madison entered the room. Every sacrifice that was framed as temporary but became permanent. Every time my achievements were acknowledged with a quick, "That's nice, honey," before the conversation pivoted back to Madison's latest project. It was the kind of truth you don't learn in a dramatic revelation. It accumulates slowly, like sediment, layer after layer, until you're standing on a foundation of second-place finishes that feels so solid you forget it was ever constructed at all. College was where the favoritism stopped being a subtle undercurrent and became the entire ocean we were swimming in, with Madison floating on a luxury yacht while I treaded water miles from shore. When Madison got accepted into the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, my parents reacted like she had been personally selected by Anna Wintour to revolutionize the fashion industry. They flew out with her to tour the campus, took hundreds of photos of her standing in front of iconic buildings, posted long social media tributes about our visionary daughter following her calling, and threw a party where relatives brought cards stuffed with cash and advice. They covered her tuition in full. They paid for her apartment in Manhattan, one of those tiny studios that cost more per month than most people's car payments. They sent monthly stipends for supplies, for networking events, for the wardrobe she needed to look the part in the fashion world. I overheard my dad on the phone with his brother one night, voice low but clear. It's an investment in Madison's brand. If she succeeds, it benefits the whole family. I sat on the stairs, listening to my own future being explicitly framed as less valuable than my sister's hypothetical returns. My college experience existed in a completely different universe. When I brought up tuition costs, my dad barely looked up from his laptop. College is expensive, Em. You're smart enough to figure out scholarships. Besides, you don't need a fancy school. You're going into something practical, right? State school is perfect for that. My mom added, her voice gentle as always, like she was explaining something for my own good. Madison needs the specialized environment. You'll thrive anywhere. That's just who you are. So I went to Portland State, not because it was my dream school, but because it was affordable. I worked 25 hours a week at a campus bookstore, scanning textbooks and restocking shelves. I lived in a shared apartment with 3 roommates, sleeping on a futon in a converted dining room with a curtain for a door. I ate instant oatmeal for breakfast, peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, and whatever combination of rice and frozen vegetables I could stretch across multiple dinners. One night remains crystallized in my memory with perfect clarity. I was studying for a statistics exam at 2 a.m, sitting at our wobbling kitchen table under a fluorescent light that hummed and flickered, when my phone buzzed. Madison had posted an Instagram story from a rooftop party in Manhattan, surrounded by people in designer clothes, holding champagne, the city lights sparkling behind her like she was living inside a magazine spread. The caption read, "Living the dream." I looked around my dim kitchen with its peeling linoleum and secondhand furniture, felt the weight of exhaustion from my shift earlier that day, and thought, we're living different lives entirely, and everyone is fine with that. But instead of spiraling into bitterness, I closed Instagram, made another cup of cheap coffee, and went back to studying. Because even then, some part of me understood that if I waited for my family to invest in my future, I would wait forever. 2 years later, I graduated with my bachelor's degree in data analytics. My parents didn't attend the ceremony. They were in New York for Madison's junior year showcase, described by my mom as absolutely critical for her career trajectory. I stood in line alone, accepted my diploma alone, and asked a classmate I barely knew to take a photo of me in my cap and gown. When I called my parents afterward, my mom said, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. But you understand, right? Madison's event only happens once. You're always going to be successful. You don't need us there to prove it." At the time, I accepted those words like lukewarm water, familiar and unremarkable. Only now do I recognize them for what they actually were. Permission for them to keep choosing Madison without guilt, reframed as confidence in my abilities. After graduation, I was accepted into a master's program in data science at the University of Washington in Seattle, with a partial scholarship that covered about 60% of tuition. It was the biggest academic achievement of my life up to that point. My parents' response, "Seattle is far, but you've always been independent. You'll manage just fine. Sounds like a good fit for your personality." That was it. No questions about how I would cover the remaining 40%. No offers to help with moving costs or first month's rent. No curiosity about whether I was scared or excited or overwhelmed. I took out loans, packed everything I owned into my 10-year-old Honda Civic, and drove north with $300 in my bank account and a list of the cheapest studios I could afford. Meanwhile, Madison's life continued its upward trajectory, fully funded and enthusiastically supported. She graduated from FIT and immediately launched her first collection with financial backing from our parents, who liquidated a portion of their retirement accounts to become her initial investors. The brand was called Madison Rose Designs, and they talked about it at every family gathering like it was a publicly traded company destined for the Fortune 500. They rented booth space at trade shows. They hired a professional photographer for lookbooks. They paid for Madison's first small retail space in Portland's Pearl District, a trendy boutique with exposed brick and vintage fixtures. The grand opening was a family event, complete with catered food, a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and relatives who flew in from out of state to support Madison's dream becoming reality. I was in Seattle, working 2 part-time jobs to cover the gap between my scholarship and living expenses, attending evening classes after full days of work. I sent Madison a congratulations card with a gift card inside, $50 I could barely afford, scraped together from tips at my weekend barista job. She texted back, "Thanks, Em. You're the best. Wish you could have been here for the opening." No acknowledgement that I wasn't there because I couldn't afford the time off or the gas money, and nobody had offered to help make it possible. There were long nights during those Seattle years when I questioned everything. My choices, my worth, whether I was foolish for choosing a practical path instead of demanding the same level of support Madison received. But somehow, each semester passed, each project got completed, each paycheck got carefully divided between rent, food, loan payments, and the small emergency fund I was slowly building. The first years of my career didn't feel like triumph. They felt like careful navigation through a landscape with no safety net. After finishing my master's degree, I landed a job at a tech startup focused on healthcare data analytics, one of those companies in a renovated warehouse in South Lake Union, where everyone had standing desks and brought dogs to work. My salary wasn't extraordinary, but it was stable, and it came with benefits, a 401k match, and stock options that might actually be worth something someday. I rented a small studio apartment, bought furniture from IKEA that I assembled alone, and started learning how to build the kind of financial security my parents had never offered to help me create. What changed my trajectory wasn't the job itself. It was the discipline I developed around money, born from years of having no backup plan. With no parental safety net, no emergency fund I could tap into, no one to call when my car broke down or my laptop died, I knew I had to create stability with my own hands. I devoured personal finance books during my commute, listened to podcasts about investing in real estate, took free online courses about retirement planning and tax optimization. Every paycheck, I maxed out my 401k contribution to get the full company match, even when it meant eating rice and beans for a week. I tracked every dollar on a spreadsheet that would have made my college professors proud. Within 3 years, I had saved enough for a down payment on a small condo in Tacoma, about an hour south of Seattle. It wasn't glamorous, outdated kitchen, worn carpet, but the mortgage was less than my Seattle rent, and I could rent out the second bedroom to help cover costs. I spent weekends watching YouTube tutorials on home repairs, painting walls, fixing leaky faucets, learning skills my parents had never taught me because they were too busy funding Madison's boutique renovations. A year later, I refinanced when rates dropped and used the equity to buy a small rental property, a duplex in a working-class neighborhood that brought in steady income. Not enough to quit my job, but enough to build a genuine safety net, the kind I had never had growing up. I wasn't trying to become wealthy. I was trying to become unbreakable. And then Daniel entered my life, not as some romantic savior, but as someone who asked the kinds of questions nobody in my family ever had. I met him at a data science conference, both of us sitting in the back row of a presentation about predictive modeling, both of us making the same sarcastic comments under our breath about the presenter's unrealistic assumptions. We got coffee afterward, talking about algorithms and career paths and gradually, without meaning to, the deeper currents that shaped how we moved through the world. When we started dating, he didn't try to fix me or save me. He just saw me, really saw me, in a way my family never had. One evening, after I mentioned casually that my sister's boutique was expanding to a second location with another round of family investment, Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said carefully, "Do your parents know how much you've accomplished? Do they know about the properties, the investments, the master's degree you paid for yourself?" I shrugged. "I've mentioned things. They don't really ask follow-up questions." He looked at me with something between sadness and respect. "You've built an entire life they know nothing about because they're too focused on Madison's life to notice yours." It was the first time someone had said it out loud, validating what I had felt, but never quite articulated. Meanwhile, back in Portland, the dynamic hadn't shifted even slightly. Every visit home, every phone call, every family text thread revolved around Madison. Her latest collection, her boutique sales numbers, her plans for expansion, her business challenges, which my parents treated with the gravity of international crises. When I mentioned buying the duplex, my mom's response was dismissive. "That sounds stressful. I'm glad you can handle things like that. Madison could never deal with tenants and maintenance issues. She's too creative for that kind of tedious work." Once again, my achievements became evidence that I didn't need support, rather than reasons to be proud or curious. My success was reframed as proof of why they were right to focus on Madison, who clearly needed more help, while I was fine on my own. They never asked about my job title or my salary range. They never wondered how I had gone from a broke graduate student to a property owner in a few short years. They assumed I was getting by in a modest way, living a simple life that required minimal resources, conveniently available to help when Madison's latest venture needed additional funding. What they didn't realize was that every late night of budgeting, every hour spent researching investment strategies, every calculated financial decision wasn't just building independence, it was building a fortress. And they had no idea that one day, when their investment in Madison's future backfired catastrophically, that fortress would be their only hope, and I would be the one deciding whether to lower the drawbridge. By the time I was in my late 20s, I had a master's degree, a stable career, savings, investments, 2 properties generating passive income, and a relationship with someone who genuinely valued me. But in my family's eyes, I was still just Emma, practical and independent and supposedly living a small life, supposedly grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way. Still the daughter whose plans didn't really count. They had no idea I wasn't building scraps. I was building an empire. And they had no idea that their empire, the one constructed entirely around Madison's success, was about to collapse so spectacularly that mine would be their only hope of survival. Going back to Portland always felt like time travel, stepping into a space where my childhood self still lived in the walls, invisible and accommodating. My mom had called 2 weeks earlier with her usual tone of casual expectation. "Emma, we're having a family dinner next Saturday. Madison has some exciting news to share. You should really try to be here. Not, can you make it? Or, we'd love to see you." But the assumption that, of course, I would rearrange my schedule, drive 3 hours, and show up to celebrate whatever milestone Madison had achieved now. Still, I went. Partly because I loved my family despite everything, and partly because some small, stubborn part of me kept hoping they would finally see me. The dinner was elaborately prepared. My mom's good dishes, cloth napkins, a centerpiece with fresh flowers. Madison arrived with her boyfriend Tyler, a photographer she had been dating for about a year, both of them glowing with the kind of energy that precedes big announcements. We sat down, made small talk, and then Madison stood up, grinning, while Tyler pulled out his phone. "So," she said, her voice bright with barely contained excitement, "we've decided to take Madison Rose Designs to the next level. We're going national." My parents erupted in cheers. My dad actually stood up to hug her. My mom wiped happy tears from her eyes. Madison continued, explaining the plan with the enthusiasm of someone pitching to investors. "We're opening flagship stores in 3 new cities: New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. We've been talking to commercial real estate agents, designers, the whole package. This is going to establish us as a major brand." The numbers she mentioned made my stomach tighten. Build-out costs, inventory, staffing, marketing. Easily a 7-figure investment to execute the plan she was describing. My dad raised his glass. To Madison. To the future of this family. The phrase hung in the air, familiar and cutting. The future of this family. Singular. As if we were all supporting characters in Madison's narrative. After the toast, my mom turned to me, her expression expectant. "Emma, sweetie, this is such an exciting time. We wanted you here because, well, we're going to need everyone to pitch in." I set down my fork carefully. "Pitch in how?" My dad cleared his throat. "We've maxed out what we can contribute from savings and retirement. The banks are offering loans, but the terms aren't great. We need family support to bridge the gap." Madison leaned forward, her eyes hopeful. I know you're doing well. You've always been so good with money. We were thinking maybe you could help with some of the initial costs. Just temporarily, until revenue starts coming in from the new locations." The room fell silent. Everyone looking at me with the comfortable assumption that of course I would say yes, because that's what I did. I accommodated. I understood. I supported. "How much are we talking about?" I asked quietly. My dad looked uncomfortable. "We were thinking maybe 200,000, possibly more depending on how negotiations go. $200,000, said as casually as someone asking to borrow $20 for lunch. My mom jumped in quickly. "It's an investment, honey. Once the stores are successful, you'll get your money back with interest. This is the future of Madison's career. It's the future of our whole family." I looked around the table, at the faces I had grown up with, the people who had told me my entire life that Madison's future came first, that my plans didn't really count. And suddenly I felt something inside me go very, very still. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You want me to invest my savings, money I earned and saved while working multiple jobs and paying off student loans alone, into Madison's business expansion?" Madison nodded eagerly. "Exactly. It's a family investment. We're all in this together." "And when you say all, Who specifically are you referring to? I asked. Because it sounds like all means me providing capital for a business I have no stake in, while everyone else provides emotional support. My dad's expression hardened. Emma, don't be difficult. This is about family. Madison's success benefits everyone. How? I asked. How does Madison's success benefit me? The question seemed to genuinely confuse them. My mom tried a different approach, her voice taking on that gentle, persuasive tone. Sweetheart, you don't have the same pressures Madison does. You don't have a business to run, employees depending on you, a brand to maintain. Your life is stable and simple. Madison's future is more precarious. It just makes sense that you'd be the one to help. There it was, the core belief that had shaped my entire childhood, repackaged for my adult life. My sister's future was important, complicated, worthy of sacrifice. Mine was simple, stable, unimportant. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I need some air. Daniel followed me outside. We stood on the porch in the cooling evening, and I felt him looking at me carefully, waiting. They don't know, I said quietly. They have no idea what my life actually looks like, what I've built, what I've sacrificed to build it. Daniel nodded. Do you want them to know? I thought about it for a long moment. I don't know. Part of me wants to prove them wrong. Part of me wants to stay invisible because it's safer. And what do you want to do about their request? He asked. I looked back through the window at my family, still sitting at the table, probably discussing how to convince me, how to make me understand my responsibility to the family's future, Madison's future, the future that had always mattered more than mine. I want 24 hours, I said. Before I give them any answer, I need 24 hours to think. We went back inside. I made my announcement calmly. My family looked relieved, interpreting my request for time as the beginning of my inevitable agreement. My dad smiled. Of course. Take all the time you need. We know you'll make the right decision. As Daniel and I drove back to Seattle that night, I stared out the window at the dark highway and thought about all the times I had made the right decision, according to my family. All the times I had been practical, understanding, accommodating. All the times I had absorbed the message that my plans didn't count. And I thought about the life I had built, piece by piece, in the spaces my family wasn't paying attention to, the properties, the investments, the career I had advanced without their support or guidance, the security I had created with my own hands. For the first time in my life, I wondered what would happen if I made the right decision for myself, instead of the right decision for Madison's future. The drive back to Seattle felt longer than usual, the highway stretching endlessly through darkness, occasional clusters of lights from small towns breaking up the void. Daniel drove in silence, his hand occasionally reaching over to squeeze mine, letting me process without forcing conversation. When we got back to our apartment, I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wall, feeling something fundamental shifting inside me. Daniel sat across from me, waiting with the patience that had first drawn me to him. I need to look at the actual numbers, I finally said. Not emotionally, just mathematically. What would this actually cost me? He pulled out his laptop without a word. Together, we opened spreadsheets and documents, laying out my complete financial picture. The numbers I had spent years building, carefully, methodically, while my family assumed I was just getting by. Current salary, $92,000. 401k balance, $86,000. Roth IRA, $34,000. Emergency fund, $45,000. Equity in Tacoma condo, estimated $70,000. Equity in rental duplex, estimated $55,000. Taxable investment account, $28,000. Daniel whistled softly. Emma, you've built almost $400,000 in net worth in less than a decade, starting from nothing. I stared at the number. I had known the individual pieces, but seeing it aggregated, it was staggering. Not because I was wealthy, I wasn't. Not by tech industry standards, but because I had done it entirely alone. Every dollar represented hours I had worked, sacrifices I had made, discipline I had maintained while my family focused all their resources on Madison's dreams. Now, Daniel said gently, let's look at what they're asking. $200,000. Possibly more, my dad had said. If I liquidated enough to give them that amount, I would destroy years of compound growth, trigger massive tax penalties on retirement withdrawals, potentially need to sell one of my properties, and obliterate the emergency fund that represented my only safety net. If I do this, I said slowly, I set myself back at least 5 years. Maybe more. And for what? To invest in a business I have no control over, no ownership stake in, run by someone who has already had massive family investment, and is now expanding aggressively in an extremely competitive market. Daniel didn't push me toward any conclusion. He just asked, what would you tell a friend if they asked you whether this was a good investment? I almost laughed. I'd tell them it's financial suicide. And what would you tell a friend if they asked whether family has the right to demand financial sacrifice? That question sat heavier. Because family was supposed to be different. Family was supposed to mean something more than cold financial calculations. But my family had been making cold calculations about me my entire life, deciding I was the one who didn't need investment, the one whose plans didn't count, the one who would be fine without support. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not an emotional email, but a clear, structured analysis. If they wanted to treat this as a business investment, I would respond as an investor. The document I created was professional, thorough, and completely honest. It started with a summary of their request, then outlined the fundamental problems with the proposal. First section, the business case. I detailed why Madison's expansion plan was high risk. The fashion retail industry had a 70% failure rate for independent boutiques. Expanding to 3 cities simultaneously increased risk exponentially. Madison's current boutique in Portland was profitable, but marginally, and profit margins in fashion retail were notoriously thin. The plan assumed best-case scenarios at every stage, with no contingency for slower-than-expected growth, economic downturns, or increased competition. Second section, the investment structure. They were asking for a loan with vague repayment terms, not an investment with equity or profit sharing. I would take on all the financial risk with none of the potential upside. If the expansion failed, I would lose everything I contributed with no legal recourse. Third section, the personal impact. I outlined in detail what they were actually asking me to sacrifice. Not just money, but years of compound growth, financial security, my own future plans, including potentially buying a house with Daniel, starting a family, having the freedom to change careers if I wanted. Fourth section, the pattern. This was the hardest to write. I documented, as objectively as possible, the lifelong pattern of my family investing heavily in Madison while expecting me to be self-sufficient. I listed specific examples. Madison's private programs and my free community center classes, her fully funded college experience and my work-study struggle, her boutique startup capital and my student loans, her ongoing financial support and my independence framed as not needing help. The document ended with a conclusion. I am not opposed to supporting family. However, I cannot and will not sacrifice my financial future for a high-risk business venture in which I have no stake. If Madison wants investment capital, she should approach actual investors who will evaluate the business on its merits. If our parents want to invest more, that is their choice. But my role as the family's emergency fund needs to end. I read it over 3 times, made minor edits, and then, before I could second-guess myself, sent it to my family's email thread. Daniel looked at me with something like pride. You just set a boundary. I just started a war, I said quietly. My phone started buzzing almost immediately, text after text flooding in. Mom, Emma, can we please talk about this in person? This feels so cold. Dad, this is unnecessarily hostile. We're family, not a business transaction. Madison, I can't believe you wrote that. After everything our family has done for you. That last message made something snap inside me. Everything our family has done for you. As if being overlooked, dismissed, and expected to sacrifice was something done for me. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I wrote, I'm not available for phone calls right now. Everything I needed to say is in the document. Read it carefully. Then I muted the group chat. The next day, I took a personal day from work. Daniel and I went for a long hike in the mountains outside Seattle, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. My phone buzzed occasionally in my pocket, ignored. That evening, one message came through that was different from the others. It was from my dad, sent individually, not to the group thread. "Emma, please come back to Portland this weekend. We need to have a real conversation. Not about the money. About us." Something in his tone was different. Not manipulative, not dismissive. Just tired and maybe, possibly beginning to understand. I showed Daniel the message. "Should I go?" He considered carefully. "Only if you're ready to tell them everything. Not to convince them to support you now, but to make them see what they missed while they were so focused on Madison." Saturday morning, I drove back to Portland alone. Daniel offered to come, but I needed to do this myself. When I arrived at my parents' house, the atmosphere was different from the previous week's dinner. No fancy dishes, no celebration energy, just my parents and Madison sitting in the living room, looking exhausted. I sat down across from them and waited. My mom spoke first, her voice careful. "Emma, we read your document. Several times." My dad nodded. "We want to understand. Help us understand. We've always been proud of you. We've always known you were capable and independent." "That's exactly the problem," I said quietly. "You've always known I was capable, so you decided I didn't need anything from you. Meanwhile, you've poured everything into Madison because you decided she needed constant support." Madison started to speak, but I held up my hand. "Let me finish. I'm not attacking you, Maddie. I'm explaining something our parents need to hear." I pulled out my laptop and opened a different document, one I had prepared the night before. "I'm going to show you something. Not to brag, not to make you feel guilty, but because you need to see what you missed while you were so focused on Madison's future." I turned the screen toward them. It showed a timeline, year by year from age 18 to now, my age 28. On one side, Madison's milestones, funded and supported by our parents. On the other side, my milestones, achieved independently with no family financial support. Age 18, Madison, private summer design program, $4,500, fully funded by parents. Emma, worked 40 hours per week at minimum wage while taking community center coding classes, free but required bus fare, self-funded. Age 19, Madison, application support for FIT, portfolio photography and binding, $2,000, fully funded. Emma, worked 2 jobs while attending community college, all costs self-funded. Age 20-24, Madison, FIT tuition, Manhattan apartment, monthly stipends, estimated total $180,000, fully funded. Emma, Portland State tuition, shared apartment, all expenses covered by work and minimal loans, approximately $35,000 in debt upon graduation. Age 24-26, Madison, post-graduation boutique startup capital, $120,000, fully funded. Emma, master's degree at University of Washington, partially self-funded through scholarships and work, graduated with total student loan debt of $52,000. Age 26-28, Madison, boutique operational support, additional inventory investments, trade show costs, estimated $40,000, fully funded. Emma, saved enough for down payment on Tacoma condo, purchased rental property, built emergency fund and investment accounts, total net worth approximately $380,000, entirely self-generated. The silence in the room was absolute. My mother's hand covered her mouth. My father stared at the screen like it was showing him something in a foreign language. Madison's eyes were wide, genuinely shocked. "You bought properties?" Madison whispered. "Plural?" "I own a condo and a rental duplex," I said calmly. "I've been building a real estate portfolio while everyone assumed I was barely scraping by." My dad's voice was hoarse. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I did tell you," I said, trying to keep the pain out of my voice. "Multiple times. I mentioned buying the condo. I mentioned the rental property. But every time I brought up my life, the conversation shifted back to Madison within minutes. You heard what you wanted to hear, which was that practical Emma was doing fine. Nothing to worry about. Let's talk about Madison's latest collection. My mom was crying now. We honestly didn't realize we were doing that. I know, I said gently. I don't think you were trying to hurt me. I think you were so focused on protecting Madison's dreams that you stopped seeing me at all. Madison spoke up, her voice small. Emma, I swear I didn't know. I didn't know how hard things were for you. You always seemed so confident and together. That's because I couldn't fall apart, I said. I didn't have the luxury of someone catching me if I failed. So I learned to catch myself. My father stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his back to us. When he spoke, his voice was thick. Emma, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We thought we were doing the right thing. We thought Madison needed more support, and you needed more independence. We told ourselves we were helping both of you in different ways. But you weren't helping me, I said, finally letting the truth out completely. You were abandoning me and calling it confidence in my abilities. The room fell silent again, the weight of that sentence settling over everyone. Finally, I continued. So, when you ask me to invest $200,000 in Madison's expansion, what you're really asking is for me to sacrifice years of security that I built entirely alone to fund a business that has already received more family investment than I have received in my entire life, for a future that has always been prioritized over mine. And the answer is no, I said firmly. Not because I don't love you, not because I want Madison to fail, but because for the first time in my life, I'm choosing to prioritize my own future. Madison was crying now too. I don't want you to give me money. I don't want to be the reason you're hurt. I thought they helped you too. I thought we both got support, just in different ways. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine confusion and dawning horror as she realized the foundation her entire adult life had been built on was so much larger and more solid than mine. Maddie, I said gently, I don't resent your success. I resent that the family treated your success as more important than my survival. My mom spoke through tears. What can we do? How do we fix this? I pulled out another document, this one shorter. I don't need you to fix the past. I need you to change the present. These are my terms for remaining in close contact with this family. They read in silence. Term 1. Family conversations must include genuine interest in all members' lives. When I share updates about my work, my property investments, or my plans, the response cannot immediately pivot to Madison's news. Term 2. Financial discussions must acknowledge the disparity in family support. No more pretending we've been treated equally. No more framing my independence as evidence I didn't need help. Term 3. If Madison's business requires additional capital, she pursues outside investors or bank loans like any other business owner. I will not be treated as the family emergency fund. Term 4. We attend family therapy together. 6 sessions minimum, with a therapist specializing in family dynamics and favoritism. Term 5. No guilt trips. No weaponizing family loyalty. No trying to make me feel selfish for having boundaries. My dad read the list twice, then looked up at me with red eyes. These are all reasonable. More than reasonable. They should have been the standard all along. Will you agree to them? I asked. One by one, they nodded. Even Madison, who looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, nodded firmly. Okay, I said, standing up. Then we can move forward. But know this. I love you all, but I will never again set myself on fire to keep you warm. As I drove back to Seattle that evening, I cried for the first time in years. Not from anger or sadness, but from something deeper. Relief, maybe. Or the grief of letting go of the daughter I had been. The one who kept hoping they would finally see her if she just accomplished enough, saved enough, proved herself enough. That daughter was gone now. In her place was someone who finally understood that the only person who needed to see her worth was herself. The months that followed were strange, uncomfortable, like a broken bone healing. Necessary but painful. My family didn't transform overnight. They couldn't. Years of ingrained patterns don't disappear because of one difficult conversation and a list of terms. But small changes started appearing, like green shoots after a fire. My mom started texting me questions about my work that showed she had actually listened to previous conversations. How did that presentation to the executive team go? Instead of, "That's nice, honey," my dad sent me an article about real estate investing with the message, "Thought you might find this interesting. I'm realizing I know very little about what you've built. I'd love to hear more about your strategy." Madison called me one afternoon, just to talk, not about her business or family drama, but about a book she was reading and a podcast she thought I'd like. At the end of the call, she said quietly, "I'm learning to see you, Em. I'm trying." The family therapy sessions were brutal in the way that effective therapy often is. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Chen with a gentle voice and a remarkable ability to ask questions that cracked open truths people had been avoiding for years, didn't let anyone hide behind comfortable narratives. In the third session, she asked my parents directly, "When you made decisions about how to allocate resources between your daughters, what were you afraid would happen if you treated them equally?" My mom's answer came after a long, painful silence. "I was afraid Madison wouldn't survive without us. She seemed so creative, so full of dreams, but so impractical. I thought if we didn't pour everything into making her dreams possible, she would end up lost and struggling, and it would be our fault as parents." "And Emma?" Dr. Chen asked. "Emma seemed like she would survive anything," my dad said, his voice breaking. "We told ourselves she didn't need us. But really, we just trusted her to figure things out because it was easier than trying to support two daughters equally." "It was neglect," Dr. Chen said plainly. "Well-intentioned neglect dressed up as confidence, but neglect nonetheless." Hearing that word, neglect, applied to my childhood, made something inside me crack and then, surprisingly, begin to heal. Because it named the thing I had felt but never been able to articulate. I hadn't been abused. I hadn't been actively harmed, but I had been consistently overlooked, and that had left its own kind of damage. Madison's therapy homework was to list every instance of family financial support she could remember. The list was long, longer than even she had realized, and when she read it aloud in the next session, she cried. I thought I was successful because of my talent and hard work, but I had a running start while Emma was running uphill. Meanwhile, Daniel and I were building our own future, quietly, steadily. I got a promotion at work, a director-level position that came with a significant salary increase and equity that would actually be meaningful if the company went public. We started seriously discussing buying a house together, somewhere with enough space for an office for me and a workshop for Daniel's woodworking hobby. One Saturday afternoon, while we were looking at listings online, Daniel said casually, "Have you thought more about that idea? The thing you mentioned about helping kids who were overlooked in their families?" I had been thinking about it constantly. The Last Child Project, I called it in my mind, though I hadn't told anyone the name. A fund to support young adults who were aging out of situations where their needs had been consistently deprioritized. Kids who were told they were resilient enough to figure things out alone. People who needed help building the first rungs of a ladder nobody had held for them. "I want to do it," I said. "But I want to do it right. Structure it properly. Maybe start small with a few scholarships, then grow it as I can." Daniel smiled. "I think it's perfect. You're taking what almost broke you and turning it into something that could save someone else." By the time my 29th birthday came around, things looked completely different from the year before. My family threw a dinner party, but this time it was actually for me, not a family gathering that happened to coincide with my birthday. They gave thoughtful gifts, things that showed they had been paying attention. A first edition of a book on data visualization I had mentioned wanting. A framed photo of me and Daniel that someone had actually taken time to print and frame nicely. And from Madison, a handwritten letter. I opened the letter privately later that night. It was 3 pages long, Madison's handwriting filling every line. "M," it started. "I've written and deleted this letter a dozen times because I don't know how to properly apologize for an entire childhood, but I'm going to try. I've been the protagonist of our family story my whole life, and I never questioned why you weren't standing next to me in the spotlight. I told myself it was because you didn't want it, because you were happy in your role, because we were just different types of people. But that wasn't true. The truth is, I was comfortable being the center of everything, and I never pushed back when our parents made you small to make me feel big. You deserved better. You deserved parents who showed up to your graduation, who celebrated your achievements with the same energy they celebrated mine, who invested in your future with the same resources they poured into my boutique. I can't fix the past, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know I see you now. Really see you. Not as my supporting character, but as your own person, with dreams that count just as much as mine. I love you. I'm sorry it took me this long to show it properly. Maddie. I read the letter twice, tears streaming down my face, and felt something fundamental settle into place. Not forgiveness, exactly. At least not the kind that erases everything and pretends it never happened. But something gentler. Space to build a new relationship alongside the broken pieces of the old one. As for Madison's business expansion, she ultimately did what she should have done from the beginning. She sought outside investors, rewrote her business plan to be more conservative and realistic, and scaled back from 3 new locations to one carefully chosen market in San Diego. The San Diego boutique opened successfully 9 months later, a more sustainable growth that didn't require the family to risk everything. My parents attended the opening, of course. But the next month, they also flew to Seattle to visit me, to see my condo and my rental property, to meet my colleagues at a company happy hour, to actually witness the life I had built. Standing in my living room, my dad looked around at the space I had created, the furniture I had chosen, the art on the walls, the life that was entirely mine, and he said quietly, "I'm proud of you, Emma. I should have said that more. I should have shown you I was paying attention." "You're showing me now," I said. "That's what matters." But I also knew that while their acknowledgement felt good, it wasn't what I had been waiting for all those years. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped needing their validation. I had found it in myself. A year passed, and then another. The Last Child Project officially launched as a registered nonprofit, starting with 5 scholarships for young adults from families where resources had been unequally distributed. I worked with a family therapist and a financial advisor to design a program that provided both money and mentorship, both practical skills and emotional support. The first recipient was a young woman named Jenna, 22, who had worked full-time through community college while her parents funded her brother's private university experience. When I told her she had been selected for the scholarship, she cried on the video call, and I saw myself in her, the girl who had built her entire life from scraps and spare moments, who had believed she didn't deserve help because she was strong enough to survive without it. "You deserve this," I told her. "Not because you proved yourself, but because you always deserved support, even when nobody gave it to you." Daniel and I bought our house, a small craftsman with a garden and enough space to grow into. We got engaged on a quiet morning on the Oregon coast, just the 2 of us and the sound of waves. No dramatic production, just a question and an answer, and the knowledge that we were building something together that neither of us had to sacrifice ourselves to maintain. My relationship with my family continued to evolve, slowly, imperfectly. We had good days and setbacks, sessions with Dr. Chen that left everyone exhausted but slightly more honest. Madison and I developed a real friendship for the first time, one based on mutual respect rather than assumed roles. But the real transformation was internal. I stopped reflexively putting everyone else's needs before my own. I stopped feeling guilty for having boundaries. I stopped believing that my worth was measured by how much I could give, or how little I needed. One evening, sitting in my home office, looking at the financial projections for the Last Child Project, and the life I had built for myself, I thought back to that dinner table moment years ago, when my dad had said so casually that my plans didn't count. And I realized that he had been wrong. My plans had always counted. They had counted to me, and that was the only audience that mattered. The epilogue to this story isn't dramatic. It's quiet, which is fitting because the most profound changes often are. 3 years after that confrontation in my parents' living room, I was sitting at my own dining table, now in the house Daniel and I owned, preparing the quarterly report for the Last Child Project. We had grown to supporting 20 students per year, young adults who were building futures their families had dismissed as less important than someone else's. I read their stories during application reviews and saw different versions of myself in each one, The sister who paid for community college while her brother got an Ivy League education fully funded. The daughter who worked through high school while her twin got to focus on being a student athlete. The youngest child who was told repeatedly that they were independent enough to figure things out alone. Each scholarship check I signed felt like reaching back through time and handing something to my younger self. My phone rang. It was Madison, calling for our now regular Sunday evening check-in. "Hey," she said, her voice warm. "How's your week looking?" We talked about work, about Daniel's new carpentry project, about her boutique's latest collection. Then she paused and said, I have something to tell you, and I want to say it right. Tyler and I are getting engaged." My immediate reaction surprised me. Pure, uncomplicated happiness for her. "Maddie, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you." "Thank you," she said quietly. "And I want you to know, we're paying for the wedding ourselves. Small, simple, just the people we love. No dramatic production, no asking the family for money we can't afford to contribute. I'm done being the person who expects everyone else to fund my dreams." After we hung up, I sat for a moment in the peaceful silence of my home and realized that this, finally, was what healed families looked like. Not perfect, not without history or scars, but growing in the right direction. Everyone learning to stand on their own legs while still choosing to be connected. A few months later, at a family dinner that rotated locations, this month at my parents' downsized but comfortable condo, something happened that would have been impossible 5 years earlier. My dad stood up after dessert and cleared his throat nervously. "I want to say something, and I need everyone to let me finish before responding." We all quieted, watching him carefully. "Your mother and I have been talking with Dr. Chen about legacy, about what we want to leave behind and what we want to make right while we still can." He pulled out a folder. "We've been working with a financial planner on our estate, and we've made some changes." He opened the folder and showed us the documents. They had rewritten their will. The estate would be split equally between Madison and me, but with a twist. A portion would be designated specifically for the Last Child project, funding it in perpetuity. "We can't give you back the childhood support you should have had," my mom said, her voice steady but emotional. "We can't undo the years we failed to see you clearly. But we can make sure that your work helping others who were overlooked continues long after we're gone." I couldn't speak for a moment. Finally, I managed, "Thank you. That means more than you know." But later, talking with Daniel on our drive home, I realized what really mattered wasn't the money or the inheritance or even the acknowledgement, though all of that was important. What mattered was that my family had finally learned the lesson I had been trying to teach them. That love isn't shown only through the resources you pour into someone's dreams, but through the respect you give their choices, the attention you pay their quiet achievements, and the willingness to see them as they actually are, not as the role you need them to play. As we pulled into our driveway, Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did it," he said. "You changed them by refusing to stay small." "No," I said, looking at our house, at the life we had built together, at the future I had created despite every obstacle. "I did something better. I changed myself. They were just paying attention for once." That night, before falling asleep, I thought about the girl I had been at the dinner table all those years ago, hearing that her plans didn't count, absorbing that blow, and whispering okay, because she didn't know yet that she had other options. If I could speak to her now, I would tell her, "Your plans have always counted. They counted then, even when no one was looking. They count now. And they will count tomorrow, and every day after, because you finally learned the most important lesson of all. The only person who needs to prioritize your future is you. Everyone else's opinion is just noise. And when you learn to tune out that noise, when you learn to build on solid ground instead of constantly shifting sand, when you learn that no is a complete sentence and boundaries are love you give yourself, that's when your life truly begins. Not when your family finally sees you, but when you finally see yourself clearly and decide you're worth building a life around. My name is Emma Richardson, and this is what I learned from being told my plans didn't count. Plans are not validated by other people's approval. They're validated by the person who makes them, follows through on them, and refuses to apologize for choosing themselves first, even when, especially when, no one taught them they were allowed to.